Sounds like Samsung could be in talks to developing OLED displays for future generation MacBooks and even iPads. What could this mean for the future, and how is this even possible? There's a lot to unpack, so let's begin. Now, this report comes from a Korean site known as The Elec, and they are not known for having the best proven track record. They don't have very accurate claims in the past, so that means take everything we're talking about today with a grain of salt. But if it ends up being true, I think it's very exciting, and what I like to do on this channel is kind of elaborate on the what ifs, or here's a report that dropped, so what happens if this ends up being true? It may not end up being true, full disclosure, but Samsung is a very massive display manufacturer out there who I think makes some of the best displays in the business. They manufacture a lot of the displays that go into iPhones, and if you're gonna get someone who gets OLED right, Samsung is a great way to go. Now, this site goes along with the idea that Apple will be redesigning the MacBook Pro in a new launch next year. Ming-Chi Kuo said that there would be a new MacBook Pro redesign launched as early as the end of this year, but given the recent refresh of the 2019 MacBook Pros with their now 6 and 8 core CPUs, I think that's very unlikely that they would update the CPUs in May and then in October redesign them entirely. Plus, if you look at Apple's track record with MacBook Pro designs, typically when they redesign a MacBook Pro, they keep that standard design for a grand total of 4 years. After the 4 years are up, that's generally when they start to give it another look. That's when they start changing the display sizes, the bezels, the keys, the USB ports, and everything. There will be internal upgrades every single year, of course, between GPUs and CPUs, and another failed attempt at fixing the butterfly keyboard, but it wouldn't make much sense for Apple to release the 16-inch or 16.5-inch MacBook Pro design that we've heard so much about at the end of this year, because the current MacBook Pro design has been in use since 2016. So it would make more sense that Apple would wait until 2020 to release this complete redesign where you can expect to have a much thinner bezeled MacBook, obviously one with a lot more power. In 2020, it could end up being the first MacBook sporting an ARM-based CPU. We don't know that for sure, but there have been reports, there have been rumors that Apple's going to be moving to developing their own custom silicon in their MacBook Pros as soon as 2020, if all goes according to plan. I understand that the software has to be drastically redesigned to make that happen, but I'm telling you, that's what they're focusing on. And if Apple can ship an A12X chip in an $800 device, and you know how fast that CPU is, imagine the kind of CPU they would ship in a $2,000 MacBook. I feel like it'll be one of those exclusive features that you can only get with a Mac, that in regards to raw processing power that the Apple CPUs will be capable of, it will be unmatched by the competition for the price point. So it's all in Apple's best interest to start developing their own chips for the Mac line, because then they have one more exclusive feature that the competition won't be able to rival them with, because the competition's still going to be stuck with overheating Intel CPUs and AMD chips, which will be good, but I think Apple's going to take the lead here in the next decade. Now, they also said they would be equipping OLED displays for the next generation iPad Pros, which, keeping in mind with the typical iPad Pro lineup, they do not get upgraded every single year. So if you were hoping there was going to be a new iPad Pro design in 2019, it doesn't really make sense in the lineup, so that's why a lot of people aren't expecting that to happen. Looking at the spacing between the release of the original iPad Pro and then the second generation and now the current generation, there's typically 18 months between each upgrade, which means there will not be a new iPad Pro design in 2019, and frankly, should there be? Everything about it is so ahead of its time. The A12X chip is insanely fast, 120 Hz refresh rate is insanely good and unmatched by the tablet competition. Face ID works even better on the iPad than it does on the iPhone right now. So going along with this timeline, you shouldn't expect an iPad Pro redesign until Worldwide Developers Conference of 2020. So we're coming up on exactly 1 year away from an iPad Pro refresh, and there's a lot of questions I have when this report claims that the new iPad Pros will be rocking OLED displays, because no iPad in all of Apple's history has ever shipped with an OLED display, and now it's going to be increasingly difficult to ship an OLED display with iPad Pros, given all of us iPad Pro users for the past 3 years have gotten accustomed to having a ProMotion display at 120 Hz. Very little latency, very buttery smooth animations, and currently that's not exactly possible with OLED displays, at least on a phone. There are certain TVs that market themselves of being able to do it, but doing something on a TV and doing something on an iPad is very different. So perhaps this means that Samsung is nearing that breakthrough. Maybe if Apple gets to that point where they feel confident enough to go through with this, we'll actually see one of the most impressive displays ever on a device of any kind, and perhaps the 2020 iPad Pros will be OLED and also 120 Hz, which in the multi-touch game at least has not been seen before. I'm loving my OnePlus 7 Pro right now with its OLED display and 90 Hz refresh rate. Everything on it looks incredibly smooth, but it is still 90, and I do hope that Apple doesn't just decide to settle with 90 Hz, because currently technology does allow for OLED displays at 90 Hz, but it would be a significant downgrade from ProMotion if it turned out that in order to have OLED on the new iPad Pros, they would have to compromise at 90 Hz, and that would kind of bum me out a little bit. But maybe some of you don't care. A lot of you, I bet, could not tell the difference between 90 Hz and 120 Hz. Apple probably knows that, and I very well know that. The differences between 90 and 120 are very, very small. In fact, any frame rate after 60 is increasingly difficult to notice the difference of, so maybe they're okay with taking a little bit of a hit and settling at 90 Hz on the new iPad Pros. But you can imagine a 13-inch OLED display would be incredibly color accurate, have very, very rich tone and contrast, very great viewing angles, and knowing that it's possible they could be bringing it to the MacBook as well, that's pretty insane. I'm very curious to see if Apple's considering bringing an OLED display to the 2020 MacBook Pro redesign. If so, that's gonna be one killer notebook. We're talking Face ID with minimal bezels. We know it's minimal bezels because people are reporting larger displays, and we know Apple's not gonna just make a larger laptop, of course. We're talking bigger displays with thinner bezels on the side, probably the same footprint as our current generation MacBooks. If they were OLED and rocking their own ARM-based CPUs, and hey, while they're at it, if you're gonna add 90 Hz, perhaps even 120 Hz OLED displays to the iPad Pro, why don't you just add 90 Hz or 120 Hz to the MacBook Pros as well? Can you imagine having a ProMotion display like that on Mac OS and how much power you're gonna have with a ARM-based CPU that's powering your MacBook? I am super, super excited for what Apple's cooking up inside right now. A lot of it's very far away. I know none of this stuff is actually gonna come out this year, but still, I really hope the Elec, this Korean site, ends up being right, even though they don't have the greatest track record, because I genuinely think these would end up being very prominent and noticeable refreshes if they do end up happening. In regards to the iPad Pro's design, this is almost as good as it gets for a tablet, so there's really not much physically they can change to this thing other than stop it from bending, but I think equipping all these bad boys with OLED displays would be a really good motivator for people who haven't gotten the latest generation iPad Pros to upgrade, because they know the viewing angles would be excellent, the colors would be excellent, and they're already really good. That's the thing. So it's kind of hard to top what Apple's already created with their ProMotion displays, but taking it to the next step with OLED technology could really set an awesome expectation for the rest of the 2020s. Also, we're gonna be in the 20s again. Doesn't that sound weird? That's like not even a year away. We're talking like 7 more months, and then boom, this decade's over, and we're in the 20s again, the roaring 20s. I hope that the future of technology involves OLED on everything, or micro LED as that technology becomes available, and that way we can do 120 Hz refresh rate on iPhones, Macs, monitors. Put them on everything, because I would notice the difference. I know not everyone would, but I would appreciate it, so yeah, that's why I'm bringing it up. Anyways, what do you guys think of these rumors? What do you guys think of bringing OLED in these higher refresh rates to multiple new devices? Let me know what you're thinking by tagging me over on Twitter or joining our Discord over here, where I try to stay as active as I can. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.